because there's honestly the reason, like I do that for my dual classes, but the reason is because there's a first period AP government class that's not mine. I have first period dual, and so I want them to be able to have the video when it's technically their first period. Because theoretically, and this is just theory, but theoretically, the virtual kids, the kids that are at home, are supposed to be following their class period schedule. Now we all know that they don't because they sleep until noon, but that's what they're supposed to be doing. So I record the night before because there is a first period AP government class. So, but today they're just going to have to make do with getting it late because it didn't work. So we're starting Unit 5, which is the third unit that we do. I know it's so confusing and it's terrible that I do that to you, but again, College Board didn't consult me when they made things. So Unit 5 is called Linkage Institutions. Right? Unit 5 is political parties, interest groups, and media. We will deal with those this week, Monday and Tuesday, and then you will have another test the following Wednesday. So like a week from Wednesday. So put it on a calendar so that you know you have a test a week from Wednesday. So that I don't get 20 emails, I didn't take my test. Do I need to call you out?
It wasn't me.
What did you not do on time?
The essay.
Oh, okay.
But I ended up doing it the next day.
Praise Jesus
I know, but
for small miracles.
The test, though, I did the test on time.
Okay, this is not a history class, so we're going to go through some of this stuff real fast, because I don't really care about the history of political parties. In fact, really, so you understand what we're dealing with today, we're really dealing, first of all, we're only dealing with the Republican and Democratic parties today. That's it. Okay? Are there other parties other than the Republican Party and the Democratic Party? Yes. They're a waste of time. Okay? They're called third parties. They don't win. I'm like Donald Trump, I don't deal with losers. That's a lie. We'll have a whole day on third parties. I'm joking. Because third parties are relevant, but not today. They're not. Okay? The founders knew that parties would be problematic, but I don't think that they ever thought that it would get to what it has gotten to today, right? But you read Federalist 10, that warned against parties. Washington warns against parties because Washington warns against sort of loyalty to a party versus loyalty to a nation. And Washington's also really the only president in U.S. history to sort of exist outside of parties, which is true. Although we will talk, he is kind of a federalist, but he doesn't have a party, so whatever. Okay, parties are necessary, and they're necessary for a variety of reasons, which we'll talk about. But they do sort of help govern and unify government and allow us to accomplish things. Okay, there are sort of 6-party systems in American history. I really don't care about them. Like, seriously, I don't care about them at all. You're welcome to look through these on your own, if you so desire. Actually, I should probably go back in case you want to stop and, like, pause the video. There's 3 and 4. There's 5 and 6. 6 is what we're in today. Okay? 5 we actually talked about a little bit, because when we talked about federalism, for instance, we talked about how basically with the New Deal, we see this era of democratic government, meaning the Democratic Party governs. Okay, you do need to understand some aspects of how parties change. So you do need to understand sort of the concept of party realignment or party de-alignment. Do we know what alignment is?
Mm-hmm.
What is it, Bruce?
When something aligns, so like it coincides with each other. Aligns.
Sure, we can go with that. Right, so if you realign, what does that mean?
Change parties.
It's not that you change parties. When we talk about party realignment, we talk about how like a region or a group or a voting block, they shift who they support, right? Like you personally, like if you go to college, right? Like Mr. MAGA over there, if you go to college and you decide that you want to like you know, fly that rainbow flag and become a liberal. Like, that's not party realignment. Nobody cares about you personally, right? When we talk party realignment, we mean large voting blocks, right? So like, if all black people all of a sudden decided that they were going to go and support the Green Party, that's party realignment. That, not that they would do that, because the Green Party's a third party and they're worthless, and we're not talking about them today. Okay. So parties do have some aspects of how they govern that allow parties to wield a certain amount of authority, and this is grossly out of date because we're in like the 117th Congress now, and it's also not a good example because we have divided government today. But what you want theoretically, what parties want, is to have unified government where the party controls the House, the Senate, and the White House all at the same time in order to get things done. We don't have that right now because we have a Republican president, a Republican Senate, and a Democratic House. So that's divided government, which is the era that we're in. So that's how it's supposed to be. Okay. Our current Senate is actually 52, 46, and 2 because there are 2 independents. Okay. Divided government is typical basically since like well, it says 68. Like that's when we say that the era started. But it's probably becomes really prominent more along the lines of like the Republican resurgence of the 1980s. Because well, obviously we just went through the Electoral College, right? Who has the advantage in the Electoral College? You know, Republicans or Democrats?
Republicans.
How many of you think Republicans? Raise your hand. Like 4 people brave enough to raise your hand. How many of you think Democrats have the advantage? All of you that did not raise your hand, you're wrong. Okay, both of them have an advantage. They actually each have an advantage, believe it or not. Okay, Republicans have an advantage in the sense that they actually don't need to win a popular vote in order to win the presidency because of small states like Wyoming and the Dakotas and those states that always vote Republican. On the other hand, the Democrats have an advantage because when you basically take out the battleground states, the toss-up states, when you remove the purple states from the equation, Democrats start ahead. They have more electoral votes to begin with than what Republicans do. So Republicans, in order to win elections, they have to win more battleground states. But they can lose the overall election, like the popular vote, because California and New York will just flood ballots with Democratic votes. That doesn't really change. Okay. State government, I don't care about because this is a national test. Okay. You should have learned about this in U.S. history. Again, don't care that much about it. You know that we used to have like ridiculously corrupt political parties. Yes. Right? You took A-Push. You learned about Boss Tweed. No? Didn't learn about Boss Tweed?
Was that in the second semester?
I don't know. I don't teach A-Push.
We didn't make it past like World War
No. Well, actually, honestly, I don't know. I don't know where A-Push ends first and second semester. Boss Tweed is basically like right around the Civil War.
Oh, we should have covered that. Yeah, I don't remember
That
that.
was the Gilded Age. Yeah, the Gilded Age.
Oh, we definitely.
That's right after the Civil War.
Gilded Age.
Yeah. Okay. So is it the Gilded Age? Again, that's history. I don't care.
I could talk about the Gilded Age. I wrote a whole
Girl, you can talk about a lot of things.
I did.
Okay.
I did. What?
So, politics is very corrupted. We end up with some progressive reforms, such as democratic primary elections, meaning like we actually vote for people. You have some nonpartisan offices at state and local level to try to minimize parties' sort of abuses of everything. Okay. Civil service expansion. You all know what civil service was, right? How you get a job in a bureaucracy, right? Like before civil service reform, basically like you help getting a president elected, and then that president, like you go to him and you're like, hey, I helped you out, I need you to hook me up with a job. And then he looks at like Nixon and he goes, okay, you can be the postmaster general. And Nixon's like, all right, Nixon, you know anything about delivering mail? Nope, not a thing, but there you go. You're grossly unqualified for your job, because that's what happened before civil service reform. Okay? You also know that a president was shot over that, right?
Which one?
Grover Cleveland? I don't know. No, definitely not Grover. No, James A. Garfield. Not Cleveland. Cleveland was the one that was elected in non-consecutive terms. Garfield was assassinated. Because basically he gave a guy a job, and the guy was like, "You insult me, sir, that job is beneath me." And so then he pulled out a pistol and shot him.
Wait,
'Cause
how many
honor.
presidents were assassinated?
How many presidents have been assassinated?
Yeah.
I don't know, like 6?
Really?
Oh,
I thought it was just like 2.
that was like a couple, like 3. No, you got JFK, Abraham Lincoln.
Okay.
That-
Not relevant to this class. Moving on. Okay, other party reforms. We're not a democracy, right? Like, don't kid yourself. We're not a democracy. You should know that by now.
But aren't we classified as one?
No.
Well, you said that on the video.
No, I said we self-identify as one,
Oh.
right? But Ferguson, you can self-identify as a purple Martian. Like, I don't care. Like, self-identification is irrelevant to me, right? I mean, if I want to self-identify as a 4-year-old and then throw temper tantrums all the time, like,
So we're not.
There's something.
no, yeah, we're definitely not. We're definitely not a democracy. But there are democratic aspects to our nation, and some of them come in this concept right here of initiative, referendum, and recall. So an initiative is something put on the ballot by the people that we get to vote on. A referendum is something put on the ballot by like government that we get to vote on, and those are actual like laws, right? So many years ago when I was living in California, many years ago, there was an initiative on the ballot to legalize marijuana. And this was like 2008, maybe? But it was before California actually legalized marijuana, right? Because the initiative failed. But the people were allowed to vote on it, and the people voted against it. Because marijuana is bad? No, actually, I voted against it. The reason I voted against it is because there was no provisions in the legislation about what they were going to do with all that money. Like, that was my concern. I have no problem with you legalizing marijuana. But if you're going to make $1.3 billion, you damn well better tell me what you're going to do with that money. Because I don't trust the government with money at all. So you better tell me what you're going to do with all that money that you just made. Okay? A recall is basically a removal of somebody from office. Right? So again, California in 2003, and I don't remember the governor's name because I really don't care. But that dude was recalled because he was a terrible governor, which led to Arnold Schwarzenegger becoming the governor.
Oh, nice.
That's actually how he got his job. He got his job because the governor of California got kicked out in like 2003.
Nice. Did you live in California during the time?
In 2000, yeah, I was stationed there at the time. I was in the Marine Corps in 2003. But yeah, I was stationed in California. I voted in that recall election. Not proud of who I voted for, but I voted. I'm not a Californian, so I didn't really care. And I voted for somebody that I thought was wildly comical, because I thought the whole thing was a joke. And so if you ever want to go look at like the California recall of 2003, and you want to look at the candidates, you'll probably figure out who I voted for, but I'm not going to go into that right now. Okay. Some issues as to why parties are not as prominent as what they once were. And like in addition to some of these reforms, there's some other aspects, right? And I know that this is interest groups, okay? And we'll talk about interest groups Wednesday or Thursday. I don't know which day yet. But they're a third of this unit basically. So we'll talk about them in a lot of detail. But interest groups have now taken over some of the party's functions, right? Like obviously, like rah-rah Republicans, they love guns. The NRA handles that for them. The NRA is an interest group, right? The NRA is the entity that ensures that you get to keep your, tricked out AR-15 killing machine. Okay? Mass media, media actually influences us more than what it used to because there's more media now. Again, parties used to provide us with a significant amount of information. Media does that now. This idea of de-alignment, so we said realignment was switching parties. I don't think we identified de-alignment. De-alignment is simply like leaving the Republican or Democratic Party, right? And becoming independent. That's a complex issue because the reality is, while more people identify as independent, again, it's self-identification, right? Like, I could run around and be like, I'm an independent, but I only ever vote for Republicans. Dude, you're not independent then. Like, you're just not. Like, if you only ever vote for Republicans, you're not an independent, right? Doesn't matter that you claim to be. So there's some aspects in which de-alignment is probably not accurate, but there are other aspects in which de-alignment like is accurate because we're not joining the parties for the most part. Because when you join a party, like seriously, free advice to you, don't ever join a political party, right? Like if you ever sign up for a political party, they will simply harass you endlessly and be like, we need money to help fight whichever party you didn't sign up for because they want to do all of these terrible things, right? Like that's all they do. They just basically like harass you for money, right? And God forbid you actually become wealthy because then your name will like end up on like a real donor list and then actual congressmen will like robocall you and be like, I'm fighting for a seat in the Texas 2nd and I need your help to defeat because that's what congressmen do now. Like literally, in you don't need to know this, but in Congress, they have these like massive binders, right? Which I know sounds like Mitt Romney and his binders of women. And if you don't get that reference, you should pay attention more in life. But they have like these massive binders of like just people's like name and phone number and like a little bit of information about them, right? And congressmen, like in Congress, there's basically like a room that is nothing but like cubicles of telephones. And congressmen go and sit down and they just start calling people and they're like, will you give me money? Because that's what they do. Yeah. Okay, again, we talked about I just mentioned this, right? Like all these people that like, oh, I'm independent. No, you're not, dude. You only vote for the Democrats. You're not actually an independent. Democratic Party reform. This is sort of essential, and you actually need to know this. Some of this is history, but it's actually come back around, and it's become more important as well. So when it comes to the Democratic Party, basically, here's what happens. Right, so the Democratic Party was successful for a long, long time, right? So like the 1930s, all the way basically to the end of the 60s, Democrats just ran everything, right? Like they won all the elections, they ran everything, like, yay, Democrats. The only Republican that won during that time was Dwight D. Eisenhower, and we're not even 100% certain that he was a Republican, right? Like he was a military general, okay, who was in some levels apolitical, okay? But what the Democratic Party does, because Democrats care so much about like representation and like identity politics, and trust me, that's actually not a new thing, because if you go back and you look at this in the 1970s, they're basically trying to figure out a way to be a little bit more inclusive. And some of this comes out of 1968, because 1968 was fascinating. In 68, the Democrats lose the 68 election. And it's why 68 is sort of deemed to be the start of some of these things. I'm gonna be honest with you, I personally don't believe that. Okay, if Kennedy had not been shot and assassinated, he would have, in my opinion, he would have won the election in 1968, right? And you would have continued to see Democratic dominance. You know what Kennedy I'm talking about, right? You know I'm not talking about Jack. John F. Kennedy.
Yeah, John.
We're not. Jack is a nickname for John. He went by Jack. Jack Kennedy. John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy was assassinated in 1963. His brother, Bobby Kennedy, was a presidential candidate in 1968. And Bobby Kennedy was assassinated in California in like June of 68.
Why did they do that?
What?
There must be something wrong with that family. I'll find something else.
Supposedly the Kennedys are cursed.
Yeah, I couldn't
Like,
find
supposedly that family is actually cursed. Like John F. Kennedy's
Oh, don't
grandson. So like one of the Kennedys died like 8 years ago or 10 years ago. It's been a little while now. Because he was skiing and he ran into a tree. Like that's a pretty crappy way to die. Like that's also a fairly improbable way to die. But yeah, yeah. So 68 is sort of odd, and they lose, and the Democrats hadn't lost forever, and so they kind of overreact. And then they're like, well, we need to be more inclusive so that like more people will vote for us so that we can keep winning. And so then they're like, hey, let's let all of these different people in, and we'll have like quotas, and we'll make sure like women get to participate and minorities. And then what happens is in 1972, they have this really just ridiculously liberal candidate who gets annihilated, like just massive landslide loss, right? Like Nixon kills him, which is comical because in 72, like Nixon's running for re-election, and Nixon spies on the Democratic campaign, which is illegal, which is why Nixon ultimately ends up having to resign, which is comical because there was no reason to spy whatsoever because Nixon was clearly, definitively going to be re-elected because Nixon was getting us out of Vietnam, which everybody hated at the time anyways, so like he definitely would have moved on. Is this just moving on its own?
What in the world?
So yeah, so they get defeated in 72 by a landslide. That results in basically the party being like, we need to have some more control, right? Like we need. It's moving on its own. So the party wants to regain some control. So one of the things they do is they create something called superdelegates. And so superdelegates are basically like high-ranking party members that get to vote in order to pick the candidate. And they don't give a rat's hind end about what the people want, right? And so when you look at 2016, and we get to 2016, Hillary Clinton is a quarter of the way to securing the nomination for the Democratic ticket before a single vote is cast, because so many superdelegates support her, right? Bernie is the guy that the people actually want. Like no people really wanted Hillary. Like nobody wanted Hillary. Is terrible. Okay. The people wanted Bernie. Yet in some states, and I forget which one, there's like a northwestern state in Washington, Idaho, somewhere, like Bernie wins the popular election in the primary and walks away with fewer delegates than Clinton because of the superdelegates, right? So Bernie gets like 60% of the vote, Hillary gets like 35% of the vote, and Hillary gets like 60% of the delegates, which is terribly undemocratic, okay? And has actually now resulted in something where superdelegates can no longer vote anymore unless there's a contested election, or excuse me, a contested convention. And for the record, you want to watch a contested convention. Like if there's ever a contested convention in your lifetime, it is a train wreck that you like can't stop watching, and it is terribly entertaining. Because it's basically a bunch of like rich old white dudes that all are like incredibly entitled, thinking that they deserve everything, arguing amongst one another as to who gets to be the actual like nominee. It's fascinating. And you'll see all sorts of like ridiculously shady things go down that just proves politics in America is terribly broken, right? Okay. Also, some other Democratic Party reforms. The threshold to get delegates used to be significantly high, and now it's been decreased. That's probably more important in this day and age when you have like 25 people running, right? Because if you need 20% of the popular vote in like a primary to get delegates, and there's 20 people running for president, and don't like I'm not exaggerating when I say 20. Like literally in this past like presidential cycle before Biden got it, right? Bullock, Biden, Booker, Warren, Sanders, Harris. It would take me a while to remember all of them, but like I could throw names out that you'd be like, I ain't even never heard of that dude. Buttigieg, Wayne Measum, right? You know who that is? Wayne Measum was running for president of the United States on the Democratic Party ticket. The mayor of Pensacola, Florida. Seriously. Thought he had a chance. Okay, so yeah. So there was some party resurgence in the 90s because parties were. Dude, this is technology kicking my butt. There was some party resurgence in the 90s because parties were able to raise more funds And then they were able to use soft money. We talked about that already with campaigning, and we know soft money has kind of gone away again, and so parties have lost some of that authority because now, again, we vote for the person, not the party, and we have candidate-centered elections, and candidates raise a whole bunch of money. But there was a little bit of a resurgence. There is some resurgence as it pertains to Congress, because in Congress, like if you are a Republican in Congress, so help you God, you better vote with the Republicans. And if you don't vote with the Republicans will get you out of office, right? Like, they will, okay? Not that they will support a Democrat the next time around, because they definitely ain't doing that. But what they will do is they will primary you out of your job, meaning that they will find somebody else that will toe the party line to run in a primary against you, and then that person will take your seat in the general election. Because you'll learn when we get to like Congress, most congressmen just get reelected all the time because they represent districts that are not very diverse, and the districts always vote the same way. And so in reality, the only way to lose your job is to lose it in a primary, right? And I forget the dude's name. I can see his picture right now, but I forget his name. But you can go ask the dude that lost to AOC in 2018, because he was like a 10-term, like very, very powerful Democratic representative. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez beat him in a primary to take his seat, right? Like, that's how parties deal with it. Not that the Democratic Party didn't do that. That was not a Democratic Party issue. The Democratic Party does not like AOC, okay? But AOC does toe the line, right? Like when Nancy Pelosi tells her, hey, you need to vote this way, she goes and votes that way, right? Like she holds the party line. As much as that girl loves to run her mouth and talk about, you know, the Green New Deal and all these wonderful things that she's doing, right? When the Democrats in Congress tell her you need to vote this way, she does what she's told, okay? Because that's what they do. There are some allegations that parties are dying. We're so partisan, I'm not sure that I buy that. But there are some compelling arguments for why parties are significantly less important. And one of the compelling arguments is this, right? So if we go back and let's compare Bush and Obama, right? Because those are the last two presidents that served a full eight years and completed their terms, right? I'm gonna paraphrase because I don't know the direct quote. I'm gonna paraphrase, and then I want you to tell me which president said this, right? Which president said we're a nation of immigrants, but our immigration system is flawed or broken? Does that sound like something Bush would say or something Obama would say?
Say it again.
We are a nation of immigrants, but our immigration system is broken.
I feel like it's a trick question.
It is a trick question. They both said it. Both said it.
They both said the same thing?
Right? Essentially, yeah, that's why I paraphrased and didn't give you a direct quote. Right? Which one of them used taxpayer funds to bail out private industry? Bush or Obama?
I'm gonna say both.
Both.
Not
Right? In fact, when we used to do this like in class, like I used to put this list up there and we would go through them one by one and I would ask you like, who did this? And then every now and then, because I wouldn't tell you the correct answers until the very end, but it's like 7 or 8 different things, and the answer is both of them. Both of them. Right? Which is wildly comical, because go find a Republican today and be like, how was Obama as president? And they're like, oh my God, Obama, he killed the country, the worst president ever. Right? How was Bush? Oh, Bush was okay. He was okay. Right? Or you go ask a Democrat and they're like, Bush got us into all these terrible wars, he's a terrible president. What about Obama? Oh, Obama did a good job. No, Obama kept the same wars going. Okay? I hate to say this, basically the same dude. Like, policy-wise, not that much change in 16 years, right? Right? Like, spying on American people, right? So that the United States government is like reading your text messages right now as you play on your phone as I'm talking, right? Which president allowed that to happen? Both of them, right? The Patriot Act passed while Bush was in office. Obama was, as a senator at the time, Obama was like, this is terrible, terrible, we can't do this, it's wrong. And then Obama becomes president, and we have to, like, extend the Patriot Act, and what does Obama do? We need this to fight terrorism. No, now you're the one that's getting the data from everybody, and so you're okay with it because you're in charge. Okay? There are some issues too about political parties as it pertains to how you win elections, and this is actually why I'm not sure that parties are dying, because there used to be a theory that in order to win an election, you had to be sort of centrist, and apparently the Democrats still relatively believe this, because Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden are very centrist. In fact, on some level, Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden are more Republican than Donald Trump, right? Like Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden love to send the United States military to foreign places to kill foreign people. Donald Trump does not love that, okay? That's a very Republican ideology. Republicans love to use the military because, you know, we're the best country in the world and everybody should be like us, and if they don't want to be like us, we'll make them like us or whatever, right? Like that's generally considered a Republican ideology. Yet Clinton and Biden are more in favor of that than Trump is, right? They're far more centrist than what you generally get out of the parties. And so there's a belief that in order to win elections, you kind of have to be centrist. But if you look at like Hillary Clinton was so centrist, she had almost no positions, right? I mean, look, Hillary was a terrible candidate, and at some point in time, we'll talk about like all of the various mistakes that she made, because she made a lot of them. But personally, I think one of the reasons why Democrats were not successful in 2016, and why I personally think Democrats will not be successful again in 2020, is because I think that rather than trying to court middle voters, because again, if we say that like these independents are not actually independents, they just, like they always vote one way or the other, they just claim to be independents, then you're not convincing them, you're not changing their opinion. They were gonna vote how they were gonna vote anyways, right? Then, in order to win an election, you have to mobilize your base to get your people to go out and actually show up to vote. And Hillary failed miserably at that. Because all of the progressive Democrats were like, no, we're out, we're not doing that, we're done, right? Whereas the Republicans, like you had all kinds of Republicans that did not like Donald Trump, that basically went to the polls holding their nose going, yeah, he stinks, but I'll vote for him because he's better than the alternative.
Excuse me, Mr. Baker. They're looking at the smart board, the group of people. They'll be here about 30 seconds early.
No worries. Okay, so there's two competing theories then in how to win an election in that regard, right? Whether or not you're looking at mobilizing the base or coming to the middle. Okay, that's just, you can look at that on your own, but that just gives you a thing over the course of time about our political parties. Okay, so some weaknesses of parties. Again, if you identify as a Republican, Republicans can't make you do anything. You don't have to pay no dues to be a Republican. You don't have any duties. Like you don't have to go campaign for people. Hell, you don't even have to vote for Republicans, right? Like you can be like, I'm a Republican, right? Like John McCain's ex, or not ex, widow, or his daughter. These people that are just like anti-Trumpers. They're like, I'm a Republican. John Kasich is another good example. But then they're going to go and vote for Joe Biden, right? Well, okay, you can still claim to be a Republican and vote for Joe Biden. Like nobody can stop you, because again, it's self-identification, which is stupid. Okay. Yeah, we talked about the increase in independence. There are some other issues though, because there's some conflict within parties that are relatively significant to deal with, right? So when you look at people within the party, you do have, and the Democrats are a really good example of this, because you have competing sort of ideologies, right? You have pragmatic, like older Democrats that are like, hey, we're going to vote for Joe Biden because, you know, that's how we win elections, and Joe Biden is better than the alternative. But most young Democrats, they're not party regulars, right? They're issue purists or candidate loyalists who are not going to go and vote for Joe Biden. This is why I don't think that the Democrats will win. I think that if Democrats wanted to win, they should have nominated Bernie Sanders, because your party regulars would have been like, we don't like Sanders, but we'll vote for him because he's better than Donald Trump. And these extreme people over here would have loved it, right? Because they want their health care, or they want, they love those Bernie bros, whatever, right? But your sort of party regulars tend to be older, more pragmatic people, your idealists tend to be young people. Like, young people are very idealistic, right? Like, they think that the world is just like they have it all figured out and they know how things should function, and they don't understand like how the world really works, right? No offense to you guys, but like that's just true of all young people in all generations. Like, as the older you get, the more pragmatic you get, and the more you realize sort of compromise is necessary. Political parties are not responsive to social reform. That's true. Because again, and this is one of the problems with parties, is because we only have two parties, and basically the parties try to be big enough to get like 50% of the people. There's so much that they try to get done or try to accomplish or they put in their platform that they really aren't responsive to a whole lot. Because what you're ultimately going to end up with is some periods in which you have people within the party, and again, we use Democrats as an example, right? Like, Catholics tend to be Democrats, but Catholics are very pro-life, yet the Democratic Party is very pro-choice. And so the party sort of has issues within itself that makes it less responsive to sort of social change that's occurring radically or quickly. Okay? Parties are still responsible for nominating candidates. They don't, well, when I say they're responsible for nominating candidates, they can manipulate the system. Again, we can use 2016 as the example with superdelegates, or with the fact that in 2016, the Democratic primary process, like, they hid their debates on Saturday nights when nobody would watch them because they didn't want people to know what Bernie was saying. And they literally had an entire campaign lined up saying you can't trust Bernie the Jew, right? Like, that's what the Democrats were going to do, right? They were going to get anti-Semitic in order to try to prevent Bernie from getting it. But we do have primary elections that are supposed to give you some control and authority. Funding is now done outside through PACs, super PACs, like all of that we went over. The parties don't really have a big impact on that. The parties used to unify government, which could get things accomplished. They don't really do that now because we have divided government. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing. In fact, I probably should ask this question at some point in time too. Is our government efficient?
No.
Anybody think our government's efficient? Wonderful. So we're all in agreement. Government is inefficient, right? Is that a bad thing?
Yeah, no. Is this a trick question again?
No, it's not a trick question. Is it bad that government is inefficient?
Yes. It should be like fast.
It's not.
Trick question.
No, it's not a trick question at all.
Yes, it is.
Why do I want an efficient government? You know what efficient governments do? They pass all sorts of laws really quickly that are stupid. Stupid. In fact, an efficient government would be like, hey, pollution is bad. Pollution is hurting the environment. Pollution comes from fossil fuels. Let's ban fossil fuels. Done. We made a law. Guess what you just did? You murdered the entire economy.
Well, I'm sure they wouldn't do something like that.
An efficient government does. Because an efficient government can get things done very, very quickly without dealing with any ramifications or repercussions.
It doesn't mean they'll do stupid things with that.
Yes, it does. People are stupid.
Well,
Do not ever underestimate the collective stupidity of people. People are stupid. But that's the thing. Like, if I told you, because this is the problem. Our government is so complex. Stop. Government is so complex. If there was a single problem, and I told you the single problem, and you were like, oh, I can solve that. Yes, you could. Like, look, is pollution a problem? Yes, it is. If we ban fossil fuels, would that decrease pollution? Yes, it would. There we go. Solve the problem. Except you created 15 more. Which is why we don't want efficient government, because in solving one problem, you would create a whole lot more, and then you would have to go and solve those problems and create more problems, and then that basically just gets into a concept of like government causing all sorts of problems. There you go. Yeah, I don't care about party structure. Functions, listen, here we go. What do parties actually do, right? They nominate candidates in order to win elections. That's their primary function. They want to win elections in order to dictate how government behaves so that they can, like, implement their party platform. They do help register voters in order to try to win elections. But again, trying to win elections. That's what they do. Okay? That's voter turnout in presidential elections, which is fascinating. Just because some of these where it's really low, like, I mean, I get why it's low in California. Your vote doesn't matter, dude. They're voting for the Democrat, period. Like, don't waste your time, right? But Florida, like, that's the biggest swing state, period. and people don't go vote. And that doesn't make any sense to me too, because like Florida's basically like death's doorstep. Like that's where old people go to die, and old people are supposed to vote. Okay, they try to like unify diverse interests. We just talked about this with this idea of them trying to like make everybody happy, but then they ultimately can't get anything done. They're a moderating influence on government in the sense that like the Democrats stop whatever the Republicans try to do, and the Republicans stop whatever the Democrats try to do. So we don't do anything. Like literally, when Obama was president, we had a Congress, like in like I want to say it was like in 2 years. In 2 years, they passed like 60 pieces of legislation. That's it, right? And let's just even say for the sake of argument, in 1 year they passed 60 pieces of legislation. They make $180,000 a year, right? 60 pieces of legislation. That means they got paid basically $3,000 for each piece of legislation. You know what? Like 2/3 of those pieces of legislation did? They renamed post offices. Basically, Congress paid itself $120,000 to rename some post offices. Because Democrats and Republicans refuse to work with each other anymore. Yeah, divided government causes that. This is the last thing, and this is kind of important, right? Informing public policy, informing public opinion through party platforms. You do need to understand that a platform is everything the party wishes to encompass. Although again, it's sort of like long and drawn out. Because if you look at a party platform, they come out every 4 years at the conventions. But party platforms you can actually like buy them as like little booklets. They're like 40 to 80 pages. And it's everything the party wishes to do. But sometimes it's complete BS and they have no intention of actually doing that whatsoever. So, yeah. So there you go, we're done. Hooray, you have a quiz tonight. Oh, by the way, none of this week will go on this 6-week grading period.
Wait, so our grades are done.
Well, no, your grades aren't done because I'm still like grading your essays.
Oh yeah, you still had my mom sent me that email. She was like, "Did you do this right?" Because you said that we did really bad on it.
So at this point, like somebody got a comment that was like, "Oh my God, you actually have a footnote. I'm so like happy." It's still wrong. Like it's still not Chicago style formatting, but you at least have a footnote. Praise Jesus. Like.
Were they that bad? Were they really just out of pocket?
Okay. Here's the thing. One that announcement was probably in part my frustration for the fact that like 20% of my students didn't turn in their paper, right? Coupled with another like 17% that didn't bother to take the test, that was open for 48 hours. Right? Like, so there was a level of frustration that I had yesterday while writing that, just for people that refuse to do basic work. But yeah, the number of you, and I get it, like I didn't show you real, I mean, I did a little bit, like we talked about it for maybe a grand total of 3 minutes about how to do Chicago style formatting. But guys, like you're gonna go to college. You are almost big boys and girls. Like, mommies and daddies aren't going to help you anymore. You need to be able to ask questions yourself, advocate for yourself. If you don't understand something, it is on you to go and understand it, right? Like, I told you, use Chicago style. I told you, if you don't know what that is, go to Purdue Owl, right? I went over it very briefly in class. I assumed at that point that you knew what the heck you were doing because I told you what to do, I told you the resource to go to, and I showed you real briefly how to do it, or what not to do. If you still were confused, you gotta come and ask me. I'm not gonna get mad at you ever, for the love of Jesus. I will not get mad at you for asking me a question. I don't care if I've answered the question 10 times, right? Literally, if Bruce asks the same question 10 times, and I answer him 10 times, I mean, I'll mock him because I love him and it entertains me, right? But I'll still answer the question. Bye guys, have a good day.